The night her father turned her away at the door of his own birthday party. Something inside Clara Morgan broke. She had spent hours getting ready, pressing the only formal dress she owned, a deep navy blue sheath with subtle lines and quiet elegance. She arrived early, hoping maybe this milestone would thaw the frost between them. But instead of a smile, she was met with a scowl and a whisper that hit harder than any slap. "You look too poor to be here." His words weren't just cruel, they were surgical. They sliced into every childhood memory, every bedtime story, every scraped knee he used to kiss better. Behind him stood his wife, Margot, with that thin, triumphant smile Clara had come to know too well. And then they closed the door on what little remained of their bond. Clara didn't cry that night, not until the drive home, when headlights blurred with tears and the birthday gift she had carefully wrapped. A vintage fountain pen like the one her father used when she was little sat unopened in the passenger seat. But something else happened on that ride. The slow, painful alchemy of transformation, humiliation hardened into clarity. The girl who had spent years trying to earn a seat at her father's table realized she could build her own. She wasn't going to beg for a place anymore. She was going to take the whole damn table if she had to. What her father and Margot didn't know was that Clara had been quietly rising through the ranks at Titan Dynamics, a powerhouse in advanced manufacturing and logistics. She never told them about her job, not because she was hiding it, but because they never asked. Margot had always painted her as the artsy daughter who didn't understand business, who wore sensible shoes instead of stilettos and drove a beat-up Toyota instead of something German and leased. Her half-siblings, Parker and Elise, played their roles well, dressing in designer clothes, posting filtered snapshots from curated lives, and occupying executive titles they hadn't earned. The irony, of course, came crashing into view a week after the party, when Clara learned that Titan was preparing to acquire Morgan Tech, the very company her father had built from scratch and was now desperate to save from financial ruin. The board had already begun talks, and Clara's name had surfaced as the top candidate to lead the integration team. At first, she hesitated. The idea of walking back into that world, now as their superior, sent a shiver down her spine. Was this vengeance or justice? Would she be stepping into power for the right reasons? Or for the little girl who still lived inside her, wounded and waiting? She didn't sleep much that week. She pored over Morgan Tech's numbers, bloated executive salaries, meaningless roles created for Margot and her children, expense accounts overflowing with spa treatments and club memberships. It wasn't just unethical, it was reckless. Hundreds of employees depended on that company. Her father had turned something honest into something hollow. And Clara knew, as much as it would cost her emotionally, she was the one who had to fix it. When Titan made the acquisition official, Clara was named Director of Transition. Her first act was to schedule a full evaluation of Morgan Tech's leadership team. No names were immune, no title sacred. Every position would be judged by metrics, not bloodlines. When she walked into that first meeting, her father's face went white. Margot's smile evaporated. Parker looked like he'd seen a ghost. Elise didn't even make eye contact. But Clara stood tall, dressed in the same navy dress they had once deemed unworthy, now paired with a tailored blazer and the quiet power of someone who no longer needed anyone's approval. She didn't gloat. She didn't scold. She simply laid out the plan, a 90-day evaluation, fair, thorough, and final. What they did next was up to them. Her father's office hadn't changed much. The same mahogany desk, the same framed newspaper clippings of past achievements, the same gold-plated nameplate that once filled Clara with pride. But now, sitting across from him with a file in her hands, labeled Organizational Audit, Clara saw through the illusion. Morgan Tech wasn't an empire anymore. It was a sinking ship draped in nostalgia and denial. Richard Morgan avoided her gaze. He shifted papers that didn't need moving and cleared his throat too often. For a man who used to command rooms with his voice alone, his silence was louder than ever. "This isn't personal," Clara began, her voice steady, though her heart pounded like a war drum. "I'm not here to settle scores." Richard finally looked at her, his expression a complex knot of shame, pride, and fear. "You think I don't see what this is?" he said bitterly. "You finally getting your revenge." "No," Clara said, leaning forward. This is what it looks like when someone who was never seen finally has the power to do what's right. She opened the file, flipping to the executive breakdown. Do you know how many employees your company supports? Dad, 217. Do you know how many of them are being paid fairly and producing measurable results? Less than half. The rest are padding the payroll or collecting checks for roles that don't even have job descriptions. Are you calling my wife a thief? He snapped. Clara closed the file calmly. I'm calling her unqualified to serve as Executive Vice President of Public Affairs. She's never held a public-facing role. She doesn't even have a communications background. Yet she's drawn a $280 zero salary and charging $3 a month to a corporate card for client lunches, most of which are with Elise or her tennis friends. He flinched, but didn't deny it. And Parker, she continued, is listed as lead strategic analyst, but hasn't submitted a single client report in 8 months. Elise is some sort of brand advisor, whatever that means, but seems to spend most of her workday filming content for her influencer page using company resources. Richard finally stood, pushing his chair back with a frustrated scrape. You have no idea how hard it's been keeping this company afloat. I do, she said quietly. That's why I accepted the job. She saw something shift in his eyes. Panic. Maybe not because he feared for the company, but because he realized the facade was no longer sustainable. The house of cards was falling, and Clara wasn't there to prop it up. She was there to rebuild, without illusions, without nepotism, without him if she had to. Margot, of course, didn't take it quietly. The next morning, Clara walked into an HR complaint alleging hostile work environment, gender bias, and retaliatory leadership. It was laughable, considering the evidence. But protocol dictated a full review. Clara cooperated without a flicker of defensiveness. She had nothing to hide. Every decision, every evaluation, every data point was transparent and aligned with industry benchmarks. If anything, she was being too fair. Parker tried a different tactic. Charm. He stopped by her temporary office with coffee he didn't drink and compliments that didn't land. Look, Clara, he said, flashing that practiced smile. We've had our differences, but we're family. Why don't we, work together on this? Maybe we co-lead a task force or something. She almost laughed. You want to co-lead a task force? She asked, arching an eyebrow. On what exactly? I don't know. Synergy, innovación, thought, leadership, thought, leadership. She repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Parker, you don't even know how to log into the CRM. The smile vanished. You think you're so much better than us? No, she said, turning back to her laptop. I just stopped pretending you were better than me. Word spread quickly through the office. People began to whisper her name, not with fear, but with a cautious kind of respect. Clara was holding everyone accountable, and not just the Morgan family. She showed up at the production floor with safety goggles, talking to line workers like their insights mattered. She stayed late reading employee surveys, not skimming them. She didn't want to be a tyrant. She wanted to build something real. She often thought of her mother in those moments, of the woman who taught her to trust her instincts and never shrink herself to fit someone else's comfort. That woman would be proud, not because Clara had won, but because she hadn't lost herself in the process. 3 weeks into the transition, the tide began to turn. Clara wasn't just enforcing change. She was becoming its face. The staff, once wary of Titan's involvement, started to see the difference in how things were being handled. Morale began to lift. For the first time in years, meetings ended with action plans instead of empty promises. People who'd been silenced under Margot's regime now found space to speak, and Clara made sure they were heard. But within the Morgan household, once her childhood home, a storm was brewing. Margot was no longer subtle. She began calling old board members, hinting at internal betrayal. She showed up at the country club, dripping in diamonds and indignation, muttering phrases like corporate coup and daughter-turned-dictator. She even hosted a casual dinner with key vendors, where the wine flowed too freely and Clara's name was dragged across linen tablecloths and whispered behind manicured hands. Clara didn't respond, not publicly. Not even when Margot sent a scathing email to the entire executive staff, accusing her of manipulating her father and emasculating the found-in spirit of the company. She forwarded it straight to legal. But in private, Clara felt the sting. She'd once idolized her father. She'd grieved the loss of him quietly over years of diminishing presence and growing indifference. And Margot, she wasn't just a villain. She was the architect of the void Clara had been shoved into as a teenager. Watching her spin and claw to preserve an illusion that had already crumbled was, in a strange way, sad. And yet Clara had no sympathy left to give. The night before the formal restructuring announcement, Clara received a message she wasn't expecting. A text from her father. Dinner. Just you and me. 7 p.m. No agendas. She stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, okay. They met at a quiet bistro near the harbor, far from boardrooms and whispers. Her father was already seated, staring out the window as the last light faded. He looked tired, older, like someone finally realizing he'd spent too long in the wrong story. When Clara sat down, there was an awkward silence. Then, finally, he spoke. I watched you handle that production line issue this week, he said, not looking at her. The way you spoke to the operators. The foreman said you actually listened, asked for his opinion. I did. She replied softly, he's been there 15 years. He knows what's broken and what still works. Richard nodded. You're good at this. Better than I ever expected. She raised an eyebrow. You mean better than you ever allowed yourself to expect. He exhaled slowly. You're right. I didn't see you clearly. I let Margot's vision of what success looked like infect how I viewed everything, including you. Clara's throat tightened, but she didn't speak. She let him continue. I thought I was building a legacy, he said, but I was really just building a house of mirrors. Flashy titles, expensive dinners, hollow achievements. I forgot what the company used to stand for. What I used to stand for. She studied him, searching his face for sincerity. It was there, tired, but real. And now, she asked, I want to fix it. Whatever I can. I know I can't undo what's been done, but I want to earn my way back into the company and maybe into your life. Clara looked down at her wine glass, then back at the man who had once been her hero. That depends on whether you're willing to be just Richard Morgan, the innovator, not Richard Morgan, the puppet king. He gave a small, bitter laugh. That man was exhausting to be. Anyway, they sat in silence, not yet healed, but no longer bleeding. It was a start. The next morning, Clara arrived early at Morgan Tech, dressed not in a power suit, but in the same navy dress from the birthday party. She walked past stunned secretaries and curious glances with her head high. Her stride sure. It wasn't about fashion anymore. It was about memory, redemption. As she entered the conference room, her father stood near the podium. Margot was nowhere in sight. Clara took her seat at the head of the table, surrounded by board members, department heads, and team leaders. This was the day the old Morgan Tech would officially be reborn. The room fell into a hush as Clara stood, the morning sun casting a warm, defiant glow across her face. Her voice, when it came, was calm but firm. Good morning, everyone, she began, meeting the eyes of each person seated at the table. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this company, one rooted in integrity, accountability, and substance over style. There was a moment of silence as the weight of those words settled in. No one dared speak. No one interrupted. Clara continued, over the past several weeks, we've conducted a full evaluation of every department, every role, and every process. We've found brilliance. We've found waste. And we've found areas in desperate need of transformation. I won't sugarcoat it. The road ahead will be difficult, but it will also be honest. For once, she paused, letting the statement hang in the air like a quiet challenge. Our employees deserve leadership that sees them, values them, and fights for them. And from this point forward, that's exactly what they'll get. The room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. What filled the space was far more meaningful. A sense of clarity, of direction. Clara had just planted a flag in the heart of the company's culture, and everyone in the room knew it. After the announcement, she stayed behind, reviewing the official reports. One by one, department heads filed out until the room was empty, except for her father, who lingered at the doorway. You meant every word, he said quietly. She nodded. I always do. I suppose this is where I find out my own future, he added, a trace of humility in his voice. Clara opened a folder and slid it across the table. Based on your skills and your passion for innovation, we're offering you a new position, Senior Advisor of Manufacturing Design. It's not executive, it's not flashy, but it's real and important. He stared at the paper for a long time, then nodded slowly. I'd be honored. The following days were filled with uncomfortable truths. Margot's position was eliminated entirely. The news was delivered by the legal team, not Clara. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, just a signed letter, a final check, and silence. Elise left of her own accord soon after, preferring the curated chaos of her influencer lifestyle to the demands of real work. Parker, to his credit, stayed, reassigned to a junior analyst role under the mentorship of a sharper, no-nonsense supervisor. He began, finally, to learn. Clara saw something shift in him, less swagger, more humility. It was subtle, but it was real. And as the dust settled, Clara found herself standing in the space where she used to be invisible, now leading with quiet strength. She no longer needed validation. She no longer longed for her father's approval or chased Margot's impossible standards. She had built her own name, her own legacy, out of the very bricks they once threw at her. One afternoon, as she walked the factory floor, she passed by a wall of framed photos. Founders, employees of the year, major milestones. She stopped in front of an empty frame at the end of the row. Her assistant, following behind, noticed her pause. We were thinking of updating the wall, the assistant said. New leadership, new vision. Clara turned, a soft smile forming. Leave the empty frame. Why? Because it reminds us, she replied, that we're not finished yet. 6 months later, Morgan Tech, now officially Titan Custom Solutions, celebrated its strongest quarter in over a decade. The employees gathered for a small celebration. Nothing extravagant, just food, laughter, and genuine appreciation. Clara stood beside her father as he delivered a short speech, not about titles or numbers, but about second chances. His voice cracked when he spoke her name, and when she took the mic, she didn't speak as a daughter scorned or a woman vindicated. She spoke as a leader rebuilt from ashes. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told you didn't belong, she said, know this, you are not your lowest moment. You are what you build after it. The room went quiet, and then the applause came, not loud, not forced, just right. And as the crowd began to disperse, Clara felt a hand slip into hers. Her father, silent, his grip firm. I see you now, he whispered. I know, she whispered back. Thank you for listening to this story of strength, redemption, and rightful reckoning. If this story touched you or reminded you of the strength buried within your own scars, please consider subscribing to Vengeance Within. There are more stories waiting, stories where justice finds its way home,